once again, I want to welcome you all to another edition of Kala-I-Doscope, India Head News. Today, we're going to be discussing a very important subject, which is the Western media's coverage of India, not only in the present day, which is during the pandemic, but through really our history as an independent nation. How have they covered us? What kind of bias is there, or do we feel victimized, or do we have a victim complex? These are all kinds of things that we're going to discuss with a very, very knowledgeable panel. All journalists, all whose name starts with S, except for Suhel isn't a journalist, but he knows almost every journalist in the country. And any foreign journalist who comes to India as well is somebody that he's aware of. There's Siddharth Singh, who was editor with Mint Opinion and now is with Open Magazine. Sandipan, of course, very senior journalist, has been the editor of numerous magazines as well as newspapers. Thank you so much, Mr. Dev, for joining us. And lastly, Sunanda Rao, journalist, has worked for over 10 years in Germany and in Europe. And I was very keen to have her on to get a perspective from that side of the fence, because I know how I feel about their journalism at this present time. And my role here in this conversation is really just to help navigate this topic. I would, of course, leave the floor open to all of you to speak. Some viewer feedback I've got has said, don't interrupt so much. So I'm going to try not to interrupt too much today. Although I don't think I interrupt that much, but nonetheless, we shall take that feedback.
Actually, you do. Actually, you do.
Oh, really? You know, my internet is not very good. So sometimes I'm saying something and I blank out. So that could be it. So let's start. We'll start with Mr. Dev. And, just the first thing that comes to mind is the New York Times cover story and photograph of the burning pyres, which was retweeted and shared by Rahul Gandhi just a few days ago. And, I was, of course, like everyone else, tracking COVID very closely last year when it started, and when in the month of April and May, New York area was going through a really, really rough time. And, my sister lives there, so I was very invested in that, what was happening in that city. So I was literally watching it minute by minute. But nowhere did I see this kind of display, which frankly, it's not about concealing things. We all know how bad the situation is, but it just adds to public panic at another level. And I just wanted to have your thoughts on that to start with.
Yes, that's an extremely valid point, because, there is a sort of unwritten code of conduct in journalism, which values privacy, which values dignity of individuals. New York was in very bad shape, and many parts of the US. And there were lots of news reports of people dying in hospital corridors, refrigerator trucks being used as morgues, etc., mass burials and cremations. But I may be wrong, but I cannot recall a single photograph or video carried in Western media of the tragedy. That cremation picture, I think you're referring to a photograph taken by a Reuters photographer. And what it did, it may be the same picture, I don't know, but this is also a very famous picture, and I can bet that it'll get a Pulitzer.
Yes.
For news photography this year.
I think
what
that's
this guy did was he sent a drone with a camera. He sent a drone with a camera over the Delhi cremation ghat, which and took that photograph, striking photograph. But if he took that picture in, say, UK or US or Italy and sent it to his editor, that editor would never have published it. But those rules of decency do not apply to India. Everybody in the Western media loves a good epidemic in India, and they are making the coverage as vicious and horrifying as possible, with no concern for human dignity.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. The privacy rights that individuals have, and the dignity that extends not only to the living, but even to the dead.
It's pandemic porn. It's pandemic porn, basically.
Right. I mean, Siddharth, would you like to come in here?
Yeah, uh, I mean, this question, I know someone who attended a Reuters workshop many years ago, and this question was put to the trainer that why must you show salacious pictures of India, those fires on burning ghats, all that can, the kind of politics that you can do through pictures. Why does it apply only to India, and why don't you do it in the West? So the answer was that, well, in those countries, there are rules of privacy. And if you violate them, you are liable for criminal misconduct, or you're going to, get embroiled in some kind of legal trouble. Is it so simple that where you have a law barring these things or banning these things, you will adhere to decency, and where there are no such laws, you will do as you please? That's just one part of it. Now, tomorrow, suppose our government were to pass such a law that you cannot invade the privacy of people on be it burning ghats, or be it cremation grounds, be it burial grounds, or wherever. I can bet my last dime that within no time there'll be an editorial in one of the Western newspapers saying that, well, India is turning authoritarian. It won't allow the press to do its job. That's one part of it. Historically, too, there has been some kind of prurient fascination with India that, uh, these are different people. I mean, I don't want to go into a Sidean Orientalist way of trying to analyze these things. We have a long history of British colonial rule in this country, and colonial officials, if I may say so, that there were certain generations of those officials who were very sensitive to this country. Their knowledge of India was extensive. It was empirical. They were careful to, put a fairly extensive picture of India. But after independence, that source of knowledge dried up completely. The Westerners who come to this country, at the most, where will they go? Delhi, Mumbai? Maybe for some special story, they will venture out to some part of India. For example, the other day there was this WSJ story from somewhere in Maharashtra that, tracing the journey of a vaccine for 1,600 kilometers. But that's a single special story. It does not endow you with any knowledge about the workings of this country. I'll give you another example. The latest column by Gideon Rachman, uh, uh, Financial Times columnist. Today he's compared Prime Minister Modi with President Bolsonaro of Brazil and Donald Trump of United States, and he goes about to conclude that, well, it was a premature triumphalism. Now, I would expect a bit more understanding from a columnist like him. He should understand that India is a federal system. Health is a state responsibility. Where does Modi come into the picture for an overall all-round failure of this country? I'm not saying that the central government is not to blame or that it couldn't have done better. I mean, what can one say? It's part a question of lack of cultural sensitivity, but at another level, a deeper level, it's just complete lack of knowledge of India.
The Wall Street Journal reminds me that at the time of the crisis, York, for example, there were refrigerator vans that were lined up very close to their office. I mean, that was something that I read at that point of time, some time back. And you're absolutely right. I mean, Boris Johnson, for example, very nearly had a crisis. Was initially very, casual about, wearing masks and things of that sort, if you recall last year, till he fell grievously ill. And, everyone sort of, was praying for him and hoping him well. And he kind of bounced back from that and, went ahead and did what he had to do. I mean, every nation has had its struggles with this, and the nature of this virus, and we're still discovering what this mutant, this new variant is about. It's quite likely, and one hopes this doesn't happen, that it travels. But the way this has traveled, it's very likely that it will go to other parts of the world, not only the country, like we're seeing right now. And people just need to have a little more empathy in terms of just a momentous challenge for a country like ours with our population and limited resources in some way. that we have. And Suhel, you know, bringing you in at this point, of course, everybody knows you as the big brand guru, and you deal with reputations individually of companies, of organizations, all of that. You see this, you see this kind of reportage about a country. How do you think? What do you think is motivating it to this extent, where even if it means lacking complete human decency, you still go ahead and do it? And
so
someone,
one man's decency is another man's transparency. You know, a lot of them will justify this by saying, look, we are being transparent. And we've also got to be, I completely agree with what Sandipan and Siddharth said, but we've also got to stop being too prickly about, oh, New York Times has done this, oh, Washington Post has done this. Screw them. How does it matter? And do you think Modi cares? If Modi doesn't care, hum beech mein begani shadi mein Abdullah Diwana, the more airtime you give these Johnnies, the more you discuss it. Now, we are discussing it because we have to ramp up your YouTube following, which is already at a crescendo. But normally, if we didn't have to discuss this, we are giving these jokers more fuel. We are, I mean, no pun intended, we are the oxygen for their antics. So I don't think we need to bother about that. A. B. National reputation operates at 3 levels: citizenship, investment, and diplomacy. None of these 3 will get impacted by the photograph in New York Times. I mean, for God's sake, for 4 years, the man in the White House kept abusing those guys. Kuch nahi hua. I mean, he lost an election not because of the New York Times. He lost an election because of his own stupidity. But that's another matter. So I don't think we should give too much of credence and worry too much about this. Siddharth mentioned a very interesting point about Reuters. It has a very Shakespearean ring to it.
Again,
yeah, I love Shakespeare. Now, I can't help it if you've only been in the vernacular world and looked at Dinkar and Premchand.
We already had this debate last week about the Campari and Sanskari.
No, but the point I'm making is the good is oft interred with the bones, the evil lives long after. You always remember pictures that are, mind-numbing. If I showed you a great picture of a couple hugging just outside a COVID ward, you wouldn't bother about it. Pain sells more than pleasure. You know, Sandipan rightly used the phrase pandemic porn. I would go on further to say, I have never seen this kind of vulturism amongst cerebral people, especially who belong to the world of journalism. If you are talking about effective and ethical journalism, you should show both sides. And we are all to blame. We also revel in bringing people down. Our media, social media, or other media has become toxic. And then we claim, oh, why is this lady, or why is that person, or why is that person doing this? They're doing it because they all, and as I said earlier, I don't know if it was on your show or some other show, these people are looking for crumbs because of their current irrelevance by the present regime in India. And those crumbs are in the form of foundations, foundationships, fellowships, awards. So tomorrow, don't be surprised if this Johnny from Reuters who shot this photograph gets the, 17th Borough Manhattan Award for the best photograph in pandemic times. Mm-hmm. Everyone is doing it for their own. If you think they're doing it to send a message to humanity, then this was not the intended message. Number 2, when 9/11 happened, the second tower fell at 9:40 or 9:48 or whatever it was. Immediately, there was a decision taken by a consortium of all media organizations in the United States that we will not show coverage of bodies being flung, or people jumping off the towers. We will not show photograph of body bags. So they are what I call America. America is convenient capitalism and convenient ethics. So they didn't do it when their own country was sadly attacked in that barbaric manner. This is not the time for Western media to gloat. What they don't realize is that they are pushing themselves into a corner from which it'll be very hard to extricate, because they're taking a stand of showing the darkest side in a human being's life, when he or she has to go to cremate a loved one, when he or she is mourning. You are making mourning and grief a virtue entrapped in a photograph. And nothing could be more macabre, ghoulish, or pernicious as that. And I think that's the message you need to send out. You don't need to tell them, why did you do it? You need to say, it just says a lot about who you are. That will pain them more, rather than, as Siddharth says, otherwise they will call it censorship, this is this. Number two, look at our own politicians.
Number three.
Rahul Gandhi, he has actually tweeted with that photograph. That man's idiocy is increasing every day. Now, I don't know if it is a lack of oxygen or just a continuous decline of intellectual prowess. But for a person who's a politician in India, no matter how much time he spends in Bangkok, for him to tweet this is not only atrociously a self-goal scoring technique, but it is in terrible taste. We need to bring back good taste. Sandipan will remember this. Last week, I read a brilliant column by our old friend Shurondo K. Dattare. It was about his dying, and when she died, aunt in England. The column was written with elegance and grace. This is not a disease we choose. This is not a pandemic that any nation seeks. When grief hits us, grief is not going by caste, color, creed, religion, race, wealth. We need to respect not the fact that it has hit us, but what it is doing to people. New York Times would be better served if they analyze what is happening with mental health as a serious issue in the United States. But those idiots will not do it because it doesn't make money. This photograph will be now circulated across the world. People will WhatsApp it and they will ask you in a gleeful manner, hey, what's happening in India? I just saw this photograph in the New York Times.
It's a horror show, basically.
Having said that, how stupid is our government? Why is our government not communicating all the good that's happening? Not that very much is, but why are they not communicating? We don't have. Today, what has happened with Maharashtra, the decline in the rates, to my mind, is a great story of a turnaround.
Yes, it's a beginning.
But our own people will not do it. And I don't expect them to. So I'm saying three things. Don't worry about this. Don't give these guys too much of oxygen or credence. And number three, this is the way the world will work. You have only two options. One is you buy into this macabre, ghoulish, pernicious theory, or two is you step aside and actually focus on the work ahead. I belong to the latter. Let barking dogs bark, the caravan must move on, including the magazine. Well, that's a plug for a magazine as well.
Well, I'm sure they'll appreciate it, Suhel. Just to be clear, this is a temporary home for me because most of India Head staff, and in fact, all of it is working from their residences. So that's why we're doing this here. So Suhel, stop accusing me of trying to build followership here. And the next thing that really I wanted to also highlight is that one of the reasons for doing this was to a large extent to encourage the public to react, not so much the government, because I think we don't respond to this. I remember very recently when Meghan Markle's interview with Oprah was telecast, Piers Morgan, who's a very popular television host of Good Morning Britain, said something along the lines on the live show that he doesn't believe her. And because of that, people started writing into their regulatory body, the general public. It seems she also called the ITV chairman or chairperson, it's a lady, but the general public wrote in and they received about some 50,000 letters. And, Piers Morgan agreed with this or not, of his decision to leave or be forced out. What actually happened there was that the public, the viewership was so aware that they actually responded to this. Unfortunately, in our country, we don't see that level of vigilance from the public. So part of the reason for doing this is to tell people that, look, you have to be vigilant as well when something is being done in such a vulture-like and salacious fashion. And I think we all pretty much feel similar about it. There have been a lot of comments on social media as well. I'll read them out a little later. But Sunanda, you're the one person who has actually been working for a European media organization. It is a government organization or a state organization and has very strict standards of operation. I'm talking about DW. So there are a lot of things that they do follow because they just have to be a lot more careful than a privately held media organization would have to be. But if we start from a general perspective, what is the European view or the Western eye on India when reporters are sent here or when you have conversations with them?
Thank you, Advaita. I've been listening to this conversation, of course, besides working with Deutsche Welle for a good 12 years, I have also studied journalism there for a good 2 years. There are certain standards. Of course, this was way back before the social media era came. And there were certain very, very strict standards when you're reporting on crisis, when you're reporting during war times. Certain examples that were given in terms of where do you strike a balance when you see a murder happening, for example, or guns being fired. Do you remain a mute spectator because you're doing a job as a journalist, or you actually dive in? One of the very pertinent things today, which Mr. Brahma Jalani has tweeted, is very, very pertinent. He said, one of journalism's basic rules, be sensitive while reporting on grief and tragedy. Yet large sections of the Western media have abandoned that rule while covering India's COVID disaster. Now, I would like to also bring to your memory, bring forth here, you remember the very famous Napa bomb girl. The one that was, she was a small girl who was running away after being almost burned. And that picture had a very, very, very strong message that happened in those days where we did not have social media. It was this child, this crying child, suffering child, and it awakened a lot of emotions. Especially till day, there is not a single, at least once in a month that there's coverage on that famous girl from Napa bomb. So she became the epitome of human suffering. Now, coming back to today's times, we do have a lot of the media in Germany. For example, I was in Germany last year in February, where the alarm bells had raised, we were seeing suffering in Italy. Of course, not to the scale that we are seeing right now here. At the same time, the fact that, yes, they were also not covering about death and tragedy. It was more about suffering. It was lack of amenities. It was lack of infrastructure. There were positive stories about how neighboring countries were helping each other, how Germany kind of brought in patients from Holland across the border. It was a lot more about that. Of course, there was panic. That panic is obviously multiplied manyfold, and you have that image of suffering, and it's okay to start. I totally agree with you. These images are very hard hitting. Now, if you take, for example, the Western media, especially I'm talking about the non-Anglo-Saxon media world, there was, when I was talking to my own husband in Germany last week, he was like, yeah, okay, there is some problem. We know that the cases are multiplying. But as soon as this picture came, there were documentaries. There are very, obviously, there's also sensationalist media in Germany as well. So, the Bild, one of the largest selling and the most, you can compare it to the Sun in the UK. So they came out with the same picture. They came out with the same story. However, what we have learned as journalists, of course, this is in defiance to everything that we have learned. The human tragedy and the human suffering, especially to give dignity to the dead, is one of the first and the foremost things that have been taught to us as journalists during our times. Now, here you're comparing it with what's happening on social media. You have drones, you have a lot of equipment, technology. Everything is just like one click away. So where does the media play a role here is something that actually they're competing with the citizen journalists of today. That's my point.
I will only quote Bertrand Russell when he was asked in a session of the Fabian Society, and a lady said, I've just spoken to my own husband. He said, own is so irrelevant given the love you share. But that's as an aside. Yes, Miss Anchor, you're again on mute.
So Nanda actually mentioned Italy, and you brought up this point earlier as well about the those over 60 at that time, and Italy has one of the best healthcare systems in Europe, or so it was claimed prior to this pandemic.
Yeah.
But over 60 were actually did not receive the care and attention because there were some very, very difficult choices that they had to make at that point of time. But we never heard of that, or it was reported in very muted ways.
I mean, we also got to know about it very late, what's happening in Italy. When I reached India, there was no talk about India, Italy, what's happening. Yes, there was some, small news, but it was not till such time that it became really, the situation got out of hand and alarm bells rang everywhere. So, I'm not talking about sensationalism here, but I'm trying to talk about the fact that how European countries are actually evaluating situations. And it is important to understand that we, as a country here in India, we need also international help aid. It's a different matter. We don't want to, we don't need it, but at the same time, officially, when you hear the ambassador talking about the different kinds of aids that is being right now mobilized, this was not there a week earlier. Why not? Why is the Western media really so isolated on this one picture? And why did it move? Why couldn't the Western reporters talk about this?
That's what I kind of said. I tweeted that. I said, they're busy counting funeral pyres and not counting the unused vaccines lying in storage.
But why not?
In the United States.
But why not?
Siddharth, you need to come in. 1 second, Suhel. We'll just cut to you after, Siddharth.
I just have one point because the Italian medical system was mentioned. Look at how they responded to the deluge of cases, which just swamped their system in one go. Now, you said it was a difficult choice for them. I wouldn't say it was a difficult choice for them. It was they calculated in their own Western rational way that how do you make a decision who's going to live and who's going to die. They chose their younger people and let their elderly die. Here in India, the situation is different. Now imagine if within a span of a week, your oxygen demand goes up by 15 to 20 times. That can derail any system. Any student of engineering will tell you that there is an upper load bearing capacity in any system. Once that is breached, it's over for you. But I can tell you that for all our problems, no hospital is going to turn away a sick patient based on whether he's poor or he's young or he's old. Everyone's going to get that treatment. I'm not saying that our values are superior to I don't want to get into that. Every country has its own way of going about doing it. But the point is that, some empathy about how we are coping with the situation, how people are helping each other. My Twitter timeline is flooded with people saying that, well, something is available there, something is available there, do this, do that. I mean, it's not a doomsday scenario. People are responding.
They are responding, absolutely. Sandipan, yes, please.
I'd like to
one request. Whenever you can switch to Hindi, please do, because we have some viewers saying if there could be a little bit more of Hindi in this conversation, that would really help.
Okay. No, I wanted to say something that has been on my mind and is quite obvious, quite visible to everybody. Indian journalists and Indian so-called experts, a very large number of them, make a lot of money by sucking up to this particular Western audience, which wants to see an exotic India, a savage India, an underdeveloped India, and an India going to hell in a handbasket. I think there are two reasons for that. One is simply the colonized mindset. And I have seen journalists who get a job in a Western media outlet. Immediately, they start following the brief that is given to them by London or New York. None of them stands up when some editor from London is talking to them. None of them says ever that look, John or Dick or Christine, whatever. I'm on the ground. I see things around myself, and I think you're wrong. They just go by that imagined brief, serving a certain sort of salacious hunger, as Suhel put it. Second, that there's a lot of money to be made here. I mean, you feed that audience, you earn in dollars, and you start getting invited to New York literary parties and London literary parties. You're cool, you're set for life. So it's both a colonized mindset and a good commercial reason. And the colonized mindset, I find there is a serious lack of self-esteem or pride in a lot of Indians who deal with Western bosses or even Western guests, which sometimes even turns into hatred. I have not met a single Chinese person. He may not like what Xi Jinping is doing, but if an Englishman or a German or an Indian criticizes China, he stands up for China and says, no, look, but these are the things that are good, etc. He doesn't take unfair criticism lying down ever. I have not met a single Chinese person. We Indians lack that simply. There's something basically wrong in our, national self-regard in many people.
So, Haley, you wanted to come in and
see, deconstruct the Dutts, the Ayub, and the so-called other surnames. And if you deconstruct these people, and not just them, they are emblematic of, as Sandipan said, a larger malaise. I don't have any issues with the job they're doing. It's their right, it's their business, it's for them to do. I have an issue with platforms that then embrace this kind of journalism. Because see, I can say what I want. You may choose not to carry me on that platform because it violates your ethics. But if you don't have any ethics, you will allow me. So don't blame the messenger. You have to, in this case, blame the medium. That's number one. Number two, it's more fashionable to come across as anti-establishment because you automatically get wings of approval saying, oh, he's such a transparent fellow, darta nahi hai, isme bada dam hai, ye sabki leta hai, all that stuff happens. So now editors, जब उन्होंने कू के बारे में कहानियां फैलाई और अब ग्रामेटिकली इनकरेक्ट टाइटल्स के पोर्टल शुरू किए, किसी को प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, पर सब जानते हैं कि दुकान सबकी चल रही है. तो दुकान चलाने और जर्नलिज्म करने में एक प्रिंसिपल्ड अंतर ये है कि आप अपनी फितरत से सहमत हैं. Are you comfortable in your own skin? And the answer many a time is no. Sandipan alluded to it. I talked about it in my opening comments. These people then become the darling of the West. As for the Western correspondents who are in India, what do they know about India? They will hire an Indian lackey, usko half the salary milegi. But that Indian lackey will also, yeah, I'm working for this newspaper, that newspaper. They stay in Sundarnagar or Jorbagh. They live the bloody lives of expats, which I have no issues with. I live in Gurugram, so, I'm equally happy. At least I'm close to Khattar and through you and Khattar to the RSS. So I don't have any cudgels with that. But the point is, these guys live lives of joy and absolute disconnection with the realities. And their purview and their belief is that the other fellow journalists from the foreign press must. So they are catering to an FCC mindset, which is the Foreign Correspondents Club. They're not bothered about you or me. They will continue to do that happily. So I'm saying, आप जितनी इनकी चर्चा करोगे उतना उनको आप बढ़ोतरी दे रहे हैं. तो नंबर वन, इनकी आप चर्चा ही मत करो, क्योंकि द लेट अमर सिंह यूज्ड टू से 3 चीजें आदमी के अहम में होनी चाहिए: चर्चा, पर्चा, खर्चा. ये तीनों चीजें हैं इनकी, वेस्टर्न प्रेस की भी और जो हमारे भारतीय दिग्गज हैं जर्नलिज्म के, उनकी फितरत में भी. तो मेरा यही कहना है कि भाई, अगर आप इनकी ज्यादा चर्चा करोगे इनको शायद ये भरोसा मिल जाए कि ये सही काम कर रहे हैं। पर आखिर आपको सिर्फ एक पर्सन को जवाब देना है, और वो है आपकी अंतरात्मा को, अपनी कॉन्शियंस को. How will these guys sleep at night? There is a particular journalist whose parent is not well. Now, would it behove that someone sticks a bloody mic in? We have had instances in the past where media people have gone into hospitals and abused and heckled doctors. We've had people who have had soldiers fought because they suddenly put on the goddamn camera lights. We never learn. So, point I'm making is don't berate. What you must be thankful for is that we are cognizant of the behavior of this nature, which is not just errant and deviant, but it is non-empathetic. The fact that we are able to distinguish between the empathetic, the non-empathetic, between the ethical and the unethical, the pernicious and the pure, that in itself is a great testament to our ability to sift the wheat from the chaff.
और बिल्कुल, और मुझे लगता है दर्शकों को जागरूक भी होना चाहिए, क्योंकि अगर आपके सामने ऐसी इमेजरी सामने लाई जा रही है जो आपको पता है कि उनके खुद के देशों में अगर ऐसी आपदा आती है या ऐसा पैंडेमिक आता है तो वो लोग ध्यान बरतते हैं, तो इसके बारे में यू शुड मेक अ नोट ऑफ इट एटलीस्ट. आई थिंक दैट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, क्योंकि वो जागरूकता इन जो हम कहते हैं पश्चिमी देशों में है, वहाँ के दर्शक ऐसे होते हैं कि अगर उनको कोई भी चीज ठीक नहीं लगी तो वो बिल्कुल ऐसा माहौल बनाते हैं जहां कंप्लेन करते हैं, चिट्ठियां लिखते हैं उनकी रेगुलेटरी बॉडीज को. तो मुझे लगता है सरकार से ज्यादा हमें खुद समाज के तौर पे और जागरूक रहना पड़ेगा. And I think that's really an important thing. I worked actually for an international publication in India, not in journalism. I'm not a journalist, but in the bureau there, as the South Asia Bureau in charge manager, that kind of a role. And what I realized is that whenever a new person from abroad comes in to the Indian subcontinent, usually it's a subcontinental role. I guess increasingly it's becoming that because they are also cross-cutting. They get a list of people that they should connect with and speak with. And that list is usually a handover from the person who's leaving and the new person is coming in. And what I found in that list is that there is a certain consistency in terms of viewpoints, ideological bearings, as well as an approach to India. And a huge amount of confirmation bias plays its role as well. So although you are reaching out to local people, you're really reaching out to local people who have been vetted by your predecessor, sometimes for years and decades, and it becomes its own cozy club. And then that cozy club kind of perpetuates the same kind of stories and the same narrative. And Siddharth, could you come in on this? And this is my perspective as someone who's worked in an organization like that and viewed it from the outside.
Well, I wouldn't like to take names or go into specifics of who met whom and how, but one can observe these things. That look at the reportage of all the main papers, be it New York Times, be it Guardian, be it Washington Post. They tend to report from very specific areas, Delhi, Mumbai, at the most some other town. Very specific sort of coverage that, for example, now we don't have to get into that they don't write positive things about India. It's up to them that how it's a very peculiar understanding of India, that how does India work. It's also a very time frozen understanding of India. They do not understand that India is changing by the day. It's not even by the year now. In the last 15 to 20 years, I can remember when I started in journalism, things were very different. There were many things that you could do and there were many things that you could not do. But now, things have changed so dramatically. There has been technological change. Or take the current crisis, for example. Had this happened 20 years ago or 25 years ago, it would have been a far bigger disaster. The ability of the government to get together things. Now, for example, look at the oxygen crisis. You can see that, almost a global effort has been mounted by this government to get hold of supplies, not only from outside, but also from within the country. Imagine if you are to move oxygen within 24 hours from some place in Odisha and bring it to Delhi. I mean, 20 years ago, it was inconceivable. It would take not only days, it would take weeks. You would have been forced to arrange railway rakes. There would have been very time-consuming logistics. It's just that they have no comprehension that these things have changed over a period of time. They want, and it's also that it's a very comforting image.
सिद्धार्थ, ये रेजिस्टेंस क्यों है कि ये जो भारत की नई भूमिका है अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पे भी, और हमारी खुद आत्मनिर्भरता जो बढ़ रही है, ये व्हाई इज देयर दिस रेजिस्टेंस कि उसको एक्नॉलेज नहीं करना, कुछ बदलाव नहीं लाना? क्योंकि मुझे लगता है कि हर पीढ़ी जो आती है, स्पेशली रिपोर्टर्स जो आते हैं, उनमें कुछ तो जिज्ञासा होगी कि मैं अपने मुझसे पहले जो आया था उससे कुछ अलग काम करूं।
इसमें मैं थोड़ा सा आपसे मतलब भिन्न तरीके से इसको बताना चाहूंगा। ऐसा नहीं है। ऐसा हमें लगता है कि क्योंकि जिस तरीके का पत्रकार हम अपने देश में देखते हैं कि जो अगली पीढ़ी है वो एक अलग तरीके से, तौर तरीके से लिखेगी, समझेगी, समझने की कोशिश करेगी। आप ये देखें कि ये पत्रकार एक बहुत अलग दुनिया से है, जहाँ पे भारत के बारे में जो ज्ञान है वो बहुत सीमित है। या तो वे जिसको आप वो कह सकते हैं कि स्पेशलाइज्ड ट्रेनिंग बहुत एक कुछ चुनिंदा विश्वविद्यालयों में मिलेगी आपको, और वो एक शायद पत्रकार के लिए संभव नहीं है कि वो वहां जाए, उस तरीके का ज्ञान हासिल करे और उसके बाद हिंदुस्तान आके हिंदुस्तान को समझने की, भारत को समझने की कोशिश करे। अब वहां पत्रकारिता का क्या होता है कि आप एक पत्रकारिता के डिपार्टमेंट में जाएंगे, वो आपको एक मोटा मोटा फौरी तौर पे बताएंगे कि ऐसे लिखना है, ऐसे फैक्ट्स को इकट्ठा करना है और उसके बाद आपको ऐसे रिपोर्टिंग करनी है। अब आप एक बिल्कुल अलग देश में आ रहे हैं जहां तौर तरीके बहुत अलग हैं, जिसके बारे में आप, और बहुत बड़ा देश है और बहुत जिसको बोलते हैं कि आप विविधता है जिस देश में, हर 15-20 किलोमीटर बाद एक आपको नई चीज देखने को मिलेगी। ऐसे देश को आप समझने के लिए आपको वक्त चाहिए, समय चाहिए, आपको देश में घूमना पड़ेगा। अब वे तो आप कर नहीं, जैसा आपने बोला, कुछ तो कारण उसमें है कि कॉस्ट कटिंग है। अब आप दिल्ली से बाहर या मुंबई से बाहर कितना जा पाएंगे ना? आप भुवनेश्वर जाएंगे नहीं हर रोज, ना आप रायपुर जाएंगे, ना आप पुणे जाएंगे, ज्यादा से ज्यादा आप 1-2 शहर और जाएंगे, उसी में आप सिमट कर रह जाते हैं। आपका भारत का ज्ञान भी वहीं से आता है और फिर शायद एक आसान भी रहता है आपके लिए कि आप 10-15 चुनिंदा लोगों से आप बात करें, जो चीज आपको समझ में नहीं आ रही वे आपको बता देंगे, जिसको हम पत्रकारिता में सेकंड हैंड इंफॉर्मेशन बोलते हैं, उसको आप पोस्ट कर देंगे। तो किसी लेवल पे दुखद भी है, लेकिन किसी लेवल पे हास्यास्पद भी है कि ये तरीका है इनका इस देश को समझने का। अब आप जलते हुए घाट पे जाके आप वो तस्वीर एक ड्रोन के जरिए ला के देखें, तो चलिए, मैं ये सहानुभूति तो बहुत दूर की बात है, वो तो मेरे को उम्मीद नहीं है इन लोगों से, लेकिन आप कुछ अपना विवेक तो लगा सकते हैं ना कि आपके देश में अगर किसी व्यक्ति का अंतिम संस्कार किया जा रहा है, आप वहां ऐसी तस्वीरें नहीं दिखाएंगे ना।
जी बिल्कुल।
दोगलापन जो है उसी के बारे में सोच लें आप। अगर आप अब मैं उससे ज्यादा क्या कहूँ,
नहीं बिल्कुल। और
क्रोध नहीं है, लेकिन एक विस्मय है कि ये कैसे लोग हैं।
और ये थोड़ी साइकोलॉजिकल जो साइकोप्स जैसी चीजें भी हैं, क्योंकि अगर आप अमेरिका हो या ऐसे देश हो, उनको एक्चुअली बहुत ही डरावना लगता है कि
भयानक लगता है।
हाँ, भयानक है, क्योंकि वो लोग अपने मृत को दफनाते हैं, तो जैसे ही इनको ये विजुअल्स दिखते हैं आग की और स्टाइल ऑफ क्रिमेशन, जो हमारे लिए इज समथिंग वेरी ऑफ रिलीजियस सिग्निफिकेंस एंड आवर ट्रेडिशन, so this is actually something that psychologically also plays a very dangerous role, कि यहाँ पे बिल्कुल एक दहशत का माहौल है और
almost like apocalypse. I don't know what,
क्योंकि उनको जनरल पब्लिक को तो ये जागरूकता नहीं है ना कि हमारे ट्रेडिशंस क्या है। क्या संदीपन जी प्लीज।
So apocalypse reminds me, I don't know which paper, I think Guardian, it has carried a headline yesterday: Modi leads India into a viral apocalypse.
The Australian, the Australian.
Oh, the Australian, right. And Guardian, of course, as it is its habit, is doing 2 or 3 reportage pieces, completely biased and vulturish, plus op-eds, etc., on India. It forgets that between January and March, when UK was facing the second wave, 70,000 people died. People were being turned away from hospitals. People from London were being sent by helicopter because there was no beds in London to as far away as Scotland to be treated. But and they treated that apocalypse. 70,000 people in a country with 5% of the population of India is a huge amount in 3 months. But वो apocalypse तो उन्होंने अपने हिसाब से ठीक respect के साथ, dignity के साथ सब कुछ उन्होंने cover किया. And even reporting, जब numbers की बात आती है, 2 weeks back Time magazine did a major story on India, apocalypse, etc. And what we are saying is nothing. इसको 10 गुना ज़्यादा आ रहा है. It's the only major story on India I've ever seen which quoted just one person. A country of 135 billion people of unmatched complexity, which I can live for 100 years in India and I would still know only 10% of that. And Time magazine does a story quoting that one person. Who is that person? Dr. Ramanan Lakshminarayan, the so-called epidemiologist, who's not an epidemiologist, who's been laughed out of the Indian media a year ago. Because in February last year, उन्होंने बोला था कि जुलाई तक तो 30-40 लाख जाने वाले हैं out. And Time magazine interview लिया. So he mentioned some studies and all that, etc. Well-known studies done by the government of India. जो conclusion इस रामानंद लक्ष्मीनारायण ने reach किया और Time magazine ने loyally, faithfully छाप दिया. उस conclusion मैं बोलता हूँ एल्जेब्रा जानने की भी जरूरत नहीं है. क्लास 6 की अरिथमेटिक अगर आपको पता है तो आपको समझ में आएगा कि ये जो बोल रहा है बकवास कर रहा है. इसको क्लास 6 का अरिथमेटिक भी नहीं पता. इसको ये एपिडेमियोलॉजी बोल के घूम रहा है, डॉक्टरेट करके घूम रहा है. इसको केंद्रीय विद्यालय में भेजना चाहिए. कुछ नहीं पता और अनक्वेश्चनिंगली यू प्रिंट इट. Even that journalist doesn't know class 6 arithmetic. His editors do not know class 6 arithmetic. And this thing of talking to only one person और ढूंढ के एक आदमी को निकालो, एक बंदे को निकालो, you are confident कि ये तो बोलेगा कि सब भाड़ में गया, इंडिया तो नरक बन गई है. You seek out that person, उसको highlight करो. Who has no credibility left? Nothing. All his predictions have been off by about 100 times. Not even 50%, 30%, 100 times. You seek out this idiot to do a story on India. और क्या? This is what is happening.
वो वापस लौट आए हैं टीवी पे, मैंने कहीं देखा था.
हाँ. अभी 8-9 महीना चुपचाप था. अब फिर से सेकंड वेव आ गया, फिर से आ गया. We are giving him publicity.
Can I just add to this?
See,
the thing is, of course, I've been listening about the challenges and the limitations faced by foreign correspondents here. Suhel mentioned the FCC club, which is true to some extent. I need to add to that. It's not cost cutting is one thing. Again, the cultural challenges are there. These are people who have, let's say, covered an auto industry somewhere in the middle of France, for instance, and then as a next post they are going to India. For them, it's an exotic land. The Chinese premier, I think, who had said to the US that India is not like, or democracy is not like Coca-Cola, which will taste the same all over the world. So that kind of diversity of of the Indian subcontinent is there. Plus, the limitation again is that they are not just given India as an area to cover. It's Afghanistan. It's if things were good between India and Pakistan, perhaps they would be given even that assignment to cover, because it's also the challenges. However, now look at the other side, India. How many Indian correspondents are also there in the UK, the US? Talk about them again from European perspective. I see very, very few Indians who are posted by Indian media organizations in Europe. Even, I mean, yes, we have the few good names in the US for the longest time. Chaidanand Rajghata is there, who's been doing a good job. In UK, you have many journalists. Now we are starting to see a couple of Indian journalists who are traveling within Europe. But largely, you see that space also has been unutilized from the Indian side as well to understand and bring. It's a two-way process. I'll just give you an example. There was a Hanover Trade Fair in 2015. I had gone there the whole country, the whole country was filled with ads from India. You remember the Make in India lion with the industrial, the circles and all that. I don't know how you call it, but there was this thing. And during the inauguration ceremony, it was India was a partner country, and it was Mr. Modi was there along with Ms. Merkel. They had inaugurated. Now, the whole spiel at that time was to project, and rightly so, the changed modern India. We are a manufacturing hub. We want to move towards that direction. What do you see during the inauguration, which was actually organized by the Indian government, which was elephants outside, Bharatnatyam dancers, just you playing again and again to the romanticized notion of an exotic land. And this is something that it has to come from both sides as well. We can't expect India to be taken very seriously, as if we are, and I really tweeted about it at that time as well. Why are we still harping on our projection? Agreed. Yoga, I'm counting out of it, because the world recognizes the benefits of this this age-old knowledge that we have. We have even Ayurveda, for that matter, even homeopathy, which is housed or started in Germany. But at the same time, more than that, we want to be perceived here also in the Western world, particularly where we want to have economic ties with. Now, you see, there is hardly any conversation about India as a country, as a developing country, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of the kind of trade problems that we have, as well as it's absent in the German narrative, for instance. Why so? There is no political talk between the leaders also of the two countries. Where do you really see? The last time you actually saw India in the public narrative was 2010-11, when Shah Rukh Khan took Germany by storm. Before that, the only time you have political discourses which takes actually space in the media about India was Willy Brandt in 1971. So, I mean, we also have to think about it as a nation. Who are we? Who do we want to encourage? What is the image that we also want to portray? It's not about PR, and I really object to the word PR being used in the same breath as propaganda. It's very different. You can't misuse that name time and again and say it is propaganda when you're talking about the picture, but so is also the propaganda about, why are we playing to the galleries of their imagination, which is going 300, 400 years ago. Max Muller was this one, the German thinker that came. They had the need, the hunger to look forth for the Orient and explore the culture. Then you had Tagore, who was immensely popular. We had the entire Osho drive in Germany. You see the historical progression from in European context I'm talking about. You had Ravi Shankar. They were all they were all cultural influences that India bore heavy on Europe at that time. So now we want to have that change again in that understanding. We are no longer a land of snake charmers and cows. I've been asked this so many times, do you have elephants roaming around still, even now? Why? it's also, I'm trying to do my level best at an individual level. But why do we have to either have morose pictures of death and destruction, or you have land of snake charmers?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, Sananda,
establishment.
yeah, Sananda, I think you've raised a very important point. Is absolutely right. When I've spent extended periods of time abroad, India is not really part of the conversation. It just doesn't feature unless there's something like what's happened right now, or the tsunami, or something of that sort. Suhel, do you want to come in on this one?
See, governments have traditionally been very poor marketeers because these jokers think they know everything about marketing. I remember many, many years ago when Dr. Manmohan Singh had just taken over as the Prime Minister, Kamal Nath was Commerce Minister, and he says, we want something for Davos. And in that meeting, I just said, yeah, you mean India everywhere. Yes, that's the line, India everywhere. But that wasn't the line. That was just the echo chamber. Then we launched Incredible India. Now, Incredible India actually works again because it could work both ways. You're unbelievable or you're delightful. Then Made in India, Startup India. The problem with Modi is he actually is a sloganeer trapped in a prime ministerial body. He must recognize that there are ways of marketing a country. And there are various sectors that you need to market in. Having said that, my only slight disagreement, Sunanda, is we can't change the entire world's perceptions. Now, if some idiots think we're a nation of snake charmers, it is their idiocy that is speaking. Because if they had come out of their cave, they would know that we have progressed way beyond. It is also how you not peddle, how you market your soft power. We have 2 Nehru centers in the world. China has about 30 or 40 cultural centers. Our Nehru centers, until Amish, actually Girish Karnad, then Pawan Verma, and now Amish Tripathi. Until these guys came on the scene, the Nehru Center was only known for very bad tea and decrepit samosas, which every Johnny could walk in while you're strolling down Mayfair and go there and be, sabse millo. So we have a dhaba mindset when it comes to marketing. We think, sabko millo. Sandipan will know what I'm talking about. You cannot market a country based on an adda. Okay, it's not about 5 friends meeting and thumping each other, say, oh, you're doing a great job. So I won't bother about that because that needs a separate discussion. All I will say, I have to leave now, as so should you all, and worry about life. I think, let it be. Let sleeping dogs lie. The more we raise these issues, the more. Actually, besides, again, it's only the Twitter echo chamber. Oh, you ask the person here. You ask Ramakant Patil on the streets of Bombay, New York Times, you couldn't be bothered. So I'm saying, jitna bhav doge, utni price badhegi. Agar aap bhav nahi doge, in escalating price, it'll all come down. It's like variable pricing for an air ticket. On that note, I must wish each one of you and your families the elements of safety, double masking. Please vaccinate yourself and make sure that you don't step out of your house because now it's airborne. Yes. In fact, I would encourage you not to take part in any more Zoom calls because it's all airborne. You never know what might happen. And remember, Murphy was an Indian. Jai Hind, and God bless you. And may God continue to bless America.
Great.
Any last comments before we sign off?
Yeah. After Suhel, a friend
He's
of
just taking over from me. I mean, it was like a shock.
After this, I hesitate to say, a friend of mine and I, we are working with an IIT. We're looking at coverage of India, news reports, etc., of some 15 biggest media outlets in the world using big data analytics and doing a sentiment analysis, trying to see how biased or unbiased or whatever, which way, etc. We hope to get it done in 3 or 4 months. But after what Suhel has said, I'm thinking of calling up my friend in the IIT and saying, forget it, man. No point.
And Siddharth, Sunanda, anybody? Just last words?
No,
It's summed up very neatly.
I'll come in later. Please go ahead, Siddharth.
I just said that it's been summed up very neatly. I don't have anything to add.
No, thank you also, Suhel. It was well said. I mean, yes, there are efforts going on. I totally agree with you. We can't have the Adda like of, we do have Tagore centers all over Europe. There are people who are very, very invested in India as a country. They love India. You know how our German ambassador loves India. It is something that it takes a lot of time. He's going all over India trying to, and you require that kind of understanding. He's not dependent on briefings. He's not dependent on. He's exploring India on his own in his own right. And these are we need more and more people like that. But again, it's all individual. It's not like coming from as a directive from the government. However, yes, we have to strive from our personal. I'm doing my best to kind of bring the two continents together, and yeah, we hope to see how the most important thing is to get over the crisis. And as Suhel rightly put, let's not waste our mental and brain capacity on things that could have been done better. We do not have an influence on that. However, we do have an influence on being there for our people right now at this point of time. And
okay, thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for being here again, and those of you who are watching. And we shall be back at some point again with another topic. And we are just looking to get through this time like everyone else is, and stay safe, stay strong, stay home.